Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, it's been 1 week since the midterms, and most of the votes have been counted here in Michigan. All 3 statewide ballot proposals passed on term limits, voting rights, and abortion rights. Tonight, we will focus on 2 of those measures, starting with Proposal 1, which is changing up term limits for state lawmakers and requiring financial disclosures for all those same legislators and statewide office holders as well. State Senator Ken Horn is dialing in live to offer his perspective. And then we'll focus on Proposal 2, the voting rights measure, with Saginaw County Clerk Vanessa Guerra live in our studio. How did Election Day go in Saginaw County, and what does Proposal 2 passing mean for you when you vote the next time around? But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the follow-up. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can email us, or you can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to watch any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltapublicmedia.org. Up first, as promised, State Senator Ken Horn from the 32nd District. He is dialing in virtually. Good to see you, Senator. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, good to see you, Mike.
So you have served both in the House and the Senate. Now you're finishing up your latest term in the Senate at the end of this year. Kind of bittersweet, right? You're being termed out, so who better to talk about term limits than a guy that's been termed out, I guess. When you talk about, before I get into the Proposal 1 that passed last week, let's talk about the current term limits that's in the system. What's wrong with it, and why did it need changing?
The current term limits, just to remind viewers, there's about 15 out of 50 states that actually have term limits, and ours is probably one of the most restrictive in the country. They're designed, and I understand the intent of them, they're designed to make sure that that legislators aren't there for life, that we're constantly reminded that we're citizen legislators, and that we go in there to serve the people, and that we are the voice of the people, and that we're not kings and rulers. That's all fine and good. 14 years I spent, but we have term limits: 6 years in the House, 2-year terms, 6 years or 8 years in the Senate, 2 4-year terms, 14 years total. So that's how it stands right now. What's going on right now is that for decades now, we've had people come into office. They're there for 2 years. They become leaders in their caucuses, in their chambers. They become speakers of the House. They become a chairman of very powerful committees. We're dealing with billions of dollars. There's no other business in the world. There's no other enterprise in the world that would celebrate inexperience as loudly as we do in the legislature. If you don't have to know anything about banking to be chairman of a banking committee, or know anything about energy to be a chairman of the energy committee. You don't know anything about leading to be the speaker of the House. You just need to be able to raise money. So these are some of the flaws. And one of the things that I remind freshman lawmakers quite often, that this just like life, being down here is about building relationships, whether they're with colleagues, with department heads, with industry leaders, with community leaders. When you have a problem that needs to be solved, you can go to those leaders and solve that problem. Not every good idea deserves its own law, I often say. And so we want to make sure that we're getting people in, that they have time to gain experience, and then when they have that experience, that they can pass that knowledge along to newer legislators.
So I want the viewers to take a look at the Proposal 2 that passed. I'm not necessarily going to run through it, but I'll have the viewers kind of take a peek at it, what's involved there. So, in your experience, could you have been a much more effective lawmaker uh, if you were under some of the new term limits? Did the current term limits, I guess you can call them the old term limits, did they hold you back in some way, do you think? Couldn't have been as effective?
Yeah, I think, it just depends. I was fortunate enough to move on to the Senate, and on the Senate side, it's a little bit different because many of the members of the Senate in that chamber have some House experience, so they're already bringing some experience with them. I already had 14 years of experience in elected office on the county board. That's a little bit helpful in building relationships and understanding how some of the system works. I but it's a yet folks have to remember as well that power, just like energy, never goes away. And if the power in Lansing or in Washington isn't with the legislature, with the voice of the people, it is going to go somewhere. And what we found out, it's not even with the lobbyists. It's not with the lobby corps. It is with the bureaucracy. They've become the fourth branch of government, and they wait out legislators. And so having somebody in office a little bit longer, I've had department heads literally laugh at suggestions that some of my members have made because they know they can outweight us. And so this has been a real problem for some of our for good legislation, because good policy makes good makes for good policy makes for good politics. We forget about that as well. And so we spend so much time trying to work good politics that we forget to do our jobs sometimes. And so it is all wrapped up, and with the term limits the way they're going to be, you can spend as much as 12 years in any one chamber. That gives you some opportunity to spend some time mentoring other people. That's really going to be the benefit of this.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up sort of the lobbyists and the special interest groups in Lansing. And my thought was, and the thought of some folks, had they just sort of been running roughshod over the sort of inexperienced lawmakers because they were just coming and going so fast. So now with this new term limits, you get less of that. But what I'm hearing from you, that maybe wasn't a big a deal.
No, because they don't have time. If let's say you have an energy lobbyist or a banking lobbyist, they don't have time to as much time to spend with you. You know, when you have half the House turnover and two-thirds of the Senate turnover, they are reteaching everybody about their industry. They don't have time to lobby you. They're teaching you what the terminology is. It's the department heads that have all the power. And so this has really been a struggle for all of us. And we took the teeth out of our joint committee on administrative rules. We don't even have the ability to put our foot down when a department decides it's going to make its own rules beyond the intent of legislation. So we really need to have legislators that are in there with institutional knowledge that can say as to a department head, no, this isn't the way that we intended legislation to be. You need to change your rules back to the way they were.
Okay. I'm going to change gears because the other part of this proposal, which maybe didn't, well, maybe got more attention, had to do with the requiring annual financial disclosures for both state lawmakers and statewide office holders, Secretary of State, Attorney General, Governor as well. Michigan was only one of two states that didn't require that. So what do you make of that part of it? Will it make a huge difference to give us maybe more transparency and accountability from lawmakers?
It will. It'll give us more transparency and accountability, and it's one of the reasons I voted to put this on the ballot. Uh, it's going to require a description of assets and in both a earned and unearned income for everybody that's seeking a state office, for legislative office. This could require legislators to announce gifts from lobbyists. All of these things are really important for the system. If we want to clear up corruption, it's not term limits that's going to do that. it's going to require some financial description of where money is coming from. We want to make sure that people are coming in for all the right reasons. They're not coming in for the money. They're coming in to make a difference in their communities, and that really is going to it will be something different. Michigan was one of two states that did not have financial disclosure requirements, and it's about time that we have them.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I think of all the 3 statewide proposals, Prop 1 was the only one that was placed on the ballot as a result of a vote with the state legislature. The others had to get tens of thousands of signatures in a petition to get them on the ballot. So I'm assuming the Prop 1, you voted on that to get it out of the legislature, so it had bipartisan support, right?
It certainly did. We
Yeah.
required two-thirds vote to get it out, and so we had both Republicans and Democrats, leadership and members from all stripes in our caucus that recognize that we need to do something. And Michigan not only has term limits, but we have a lifetime ban on running for office. So once you're done with this new 12 years, you're done for life. And so it's going to be hard enough getting people to run for office, to somebody that's perfectly qualified, that has a career outside of Lansing, to give up that career, to give up their business, to give up their profession, to give up whatever it is they're doing, to come to Lansing for a short period of time and then leave and then have to start all over again, as if they were just coming out of college or just coming out of high school and starting their business again. This has been a real problem in Michigan, finding good qualified people to run. We have a lot of turnover. We have a lot of new people, but we don't necessarily have the best people in the community running for an office.
Well, you certainly had a good run, my friend, and I appreciate the conversation, and good luck the rest of the way, the rest of this year as your career in the legislature comes to an end. But congratulations, you've done a great job.
Yeah,
So
thank you so much, Mike.
thank you for joining us tonight.
You bet.
Going to change gears a little bit to another former rep, Vanessa Guerra, who is now the Saginaw County Clerk, joins us in studio, as you can see here. So before I get into all this, how you holding up? Did you get some rest this weekend? Because last week was a bit chaotic and a bit hectic.
Yeah, our election team had a 31-hour night on election night, and so I definitely slept a lot this weekend.
I bet. So going into Tuesday's election, people were still feeling the effects of that 2020 presidential election. There were concerns about threats and intimidation aimed at both politicians, poll workers. So we had this cast of election deniers, some folks that were even running for office that were election deniers. So how did that all shake out with you as a county clerk?
Fortunately, things went very well. So we, of course, heard those same concerns statewide and across the nation, that we should be mindful of these folks who were going to, show up at polling locations and threaten or, strongly deter people from participating. But we didn't have that. Now, we did prepare for it, because we always prepare for the worst. And our election director is in constant communication with Homeland Security. So we're also hearing federally, from about what we should be aware of. So we built strong relationships with local law enforcement and made sure that they were aware of election laws and knew where the polling locations were. But everything ran smoothly, and we were very grateful. And I think it's a testament to our local clerks and our election workers too, because knowing those concerns, they still showed up on election day to run their elections.
So when we talk about those extra hours, those 31 hours that you're counting and working overtime, is it a result of, was it a greater turnout? Is it that because some of these, we have enhanced voting rights, we're doing things differently, you're getting a lot more mail-in ballots, or is it sort of all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. In the clerk's office, we always say it's not about getting things done as fast as you can. It's about accuracy. And so if we became aware of any sort of issue, we tell the election workers, well, you're going to have to, tabulate them again, or, we need to make sure that every eligible voter has the right to utilize that right. And so it's just about accuracy for us. And we'd rather our locals take their time, get everything correct, so that when we get to the canvass part, where we actually review every single thing that they've done for every single precinct, we have all the information we need, and we know that they've followed the law to make sure it's accurate.
Right. The last couple of election cycles, it seems like turnout is growing. It's getting larger. Are you seeing that? Do you expect that? And are some of these new voting rights laws creating that environment where more people can have access and they are voting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, it's a statewide, it's the largest turnout we've had for a midterm or a gubernatorial year, and the same was true for Saginaw County. I think it's a variety of things, people having different ways they can vote, so no recent absentee voting. Senator Horn had made a remark earlier that a lot of people had turned out in 2020 and, you know, kind of once a voter, oftentimes always a voter. So it was maybe their first time, and so they came back again in 2022, even if it wasn't for a presidential. And then we have to acknowledge that there were some contested or controversial, I should say, proposals on the ballot, and that drove turnout as well.
I know you're not a voting analyst, a pollster, a consultant, but we talked about a little bit before the show. I mean, nationally, if you look at sort of trends, Democratic voters tend to be largely, they like to do more the absentee mail-in. Republican voters tend to be in person. Is it we're seeing younger voters that prefer to do the mail-in and they don't like to be in person, or do you see that balancing out at some point?
I think it'll probably balance out. So we definitely see younger folks. A lot of those are, I mean, we're home to both Delta College and SVSU. And so we do get a lot of young people, even when I go out to talk to them, I ask, you know, oh, are you from Saginaw County? And they'll go, no, I go home to vote. Or I got my absentee and I'll be mailing it in. So that's one thing. I think that there was a time when I think there were more conservatives utilizing absentee. I think some of the fraud allegations that were issued after 2020 scared them away, frankly. But I think they'll come back around because we lead busy lives, right? Everybody does. Whether you're retired and taking care of your own parents or your grandchildren, having one single day can be difficult for some people.
Sure. Well, that's a good segue into this voting rights proposal too that passed, and I'll have the viewers take a look at that. It's going to go up on the screen. I'm not going to read through it, but the viewers can look at it, and you and I can pick it apart a little bit. One of the items on the list, of course, requires 9 days of early voting in person. How do you as a clerk manage that, not only in the city, but in the county and with rural districts? How do you handle that?
Yeah, going from a single day to now 9, you know, full service, regular election day precincts that we'll have, it will be a significant change. I mean, you know, personally, I did support the proposal. I'm very supportive of any sort of pro-voter initiatives, particularly when 34 other states have the same setup that we have now just passed. And so, you know, I asked myself, why don't voters in Michigan have those same options that voters in North Carolina, Florida, or Texas have? So I was supportive of it, but now, of course, I have the job of actually implementing this law that I supported.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yes, and so, you know, there's no doubt about it. It will be a financial burden, both to the state and to locals. The state has said that they'll, you know, pay for funding or postage and things like that, but the actual maintaining of those 9-day election precincts is going to fall on our locals, and they can consolidate and work together on it. And so we envision a lot of our smaller communities partnering up with each other and having sort of voting centers. There's also an option that they could contract with the county, and we could have a very large voting center as well. So I envision, again, especially with our small communities who do struggle financially, that we're going to have to utilize those sort of options.
So they could consolidate 2 or 3 smaller townships into one township building that's maybe larger and they all agree on, and then who sort of coordinates that? Do you as the county clerk sort of become the leader, the guide to say, here's how it's going to work, or do they kind of make their own decisions on that?
They're definitely, it's left to the locals to make their decisions. And again, in Saginaw, we're very fortunate, have a diverse group of clerks politically that come together. They have their own organization or association, and they meet and they educate each other and help each other out. And so I know that they're going to have to really bond together again with this change to figure out how they want to do it. But we have already expressed as the county clerk and along with our election director that we're here to help in any way we can, because they are dedicated folks, but for most of them it's not their full-time job to be county clerk or to be the local clerk, and so they're going to need resources.
Right. So another item on there is requiring state-funded absentee voter drop boxes for every 15,000 voters. I think you told me earlier we do have some drop boxes out there because those were put in place during the COVID restrictions, right? So how do you see all that happening in Saginaw County? How many are we going to see, and where do they locate these drop boxes? Yeah,
so for the communities that are over 15,000 or have they need one for every 15,000. We know that that's going to be the case for our larger municipalities like Saginaw Township and the city of Saginaw, both of which have drop boxes. The city has multiple. The township is going to need to purchase some more, or the state will be giving them some more, I should say. But it's another thing the state is gonna have to, it is state funded though, the drop boxes, and so that it's nice that that is in the legislation or in the amendment. And so we'll have to take an assessment of who needs them and who needs the ones that are able to be secured to the ground, because some municipalities use like their water bill drop box, and so we're gonna need to evaluate. And we've done some of those evaluations already, but we'll be prepared as soon as the state's ready. And so we'll just be looking to see what they do pretty soon here.
In which election cycle? So does this have to then be approved by the legislature, even the voice of the voter said this is what we want, and then we're talking in the spring maybe next year?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So So a lot of the things that were put in place, particularly with the 9 days of early voting, apply to state and federal elections, but it doesn't prohibit locals from doing them for all elections. And so, and I think, for consistency's sake, we're going to want to try and do as much as we can the same for every single election. But the expectation would be that the state would have to start moving forward in 2023 so we can prepare. I mean, as soon as this 2022 is canvassed and over with, 2024 is truly starting. We'll have candidates coming in to file, and I'm a Democrat, and so I'll be holding the Democrat majority's feet to the fire to make sure they get on it, So now that they're in there, I'm expecting them to hold up their end of the bargain and get us our funding for clerks pretty soon.
Yeah, it was a shift from the House and Senate going Democratic. It was Republican, so yeah, that's on you guys, right? Or,
right.
It's on all of us. But okay, a couple of other items on here. One item that some folks maybe have concerns with. If you don't have a photo ID, you can send a document, I guess some would call it an affidavit, that's to verify you are who you say you are. So what are your thoughts on that? And honestly, are you getting a lot of people that don't have photo IDs?
It's a small population, a small number of people who typically forget or plain don't have one. And I will say, if you've never worked with low-income communities, you might not realize that there are lots of folks in our community who just do not have state IDs, or even senior citizens who chose to never drive and never had a reason to go and get a driver's license. So it is more common than people realize that people don't have IDs. But the thing I really like to point out about this issue, and we point this out all the trainings we do, is that they still have to be a qualified voter in our system. So you can't just show up on election day, have no picture, and not be in our system and get a ballot and vote that day. That doesn't happen. Right. We have to have some evidence that you are a registered voter here in Michigan. And so by enshrining that in our Constitution, I think that we're ensuring that we're still allowing people to voice their opinions and to have their vote counted, so long as they attest that if they don't have their picture ID, that are penalty of perjury, $1,000, 5 years in prison, that you are who you say you are.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of us sort of take it for granted. Well, I have a driver's license, I have a state photo, I have other things, I have to use a photo ID to cash checks and do some other things, but that's not the case for a lot of folks in our community.
Yep. And I mean, again, if you're not working with those populations, you just don't realize that.
Right. So as you look ahead, there is significant cost. We touched on it a little bit to make these changes. The state-funded drop boxes, you've got to increase staff, maybe increase security. I'm sure there's going to be some overtime involved. So is the state going to sort of continue to pay that bill, or are you going to have to work through the county commissioners to get some extra funding?
It's going to be a tough conversation, but yeah, we will certainly have to work with our county commission and then our local boards of townships and city councils, because I think when New Jersey did this, it was around $83 million overall, and so that's everything, and that's a big chunk of change. And when we think about elections, they're only more people are getting involved, and they're only getting bigger, right? And so it is a cost that it will be difficult, and for that reason, a lot of our local clerks were opposed to it. And and we encourage our local clerks, you're still a person, you still get to have your opinion and share your opinions, and so certainly do that. And we had conversations about it, that we know this was going to be tough, but the voters passed it. 60% statewide, 56% in Saginaw County, and so now at the end of the day, our job is to uphold what they've asked us to do.
And what's new too, I think, on this new Prop 2, they're going to allow sort of in-kind donations, contributions, charitable donations, which the GOP folks said, well, I don't know that we should allow that, because that could create some undue influence, but you don't see that, right? And that's a way to create some additional funds.
It is, yes. But I will say about that point, when you get a ballot proposal and you're voting, you don't get to, it's not a menu of options, right? You get the whole thing you're asking to vote on. And that was one of the provisions that I'm not particularly fond of. Because I asked myself, you know, it all came up because in 2020, the Zuckerberg, he had an organization that offered grants to local clerks.
Sure.
Some took them. But I asked Democrats, for example, you know, if Betsy DeVos offered you $100,000, how would you feel about taking that? Me personally, I would rather just continue to have our elections funded by our local governments. I don't want any outside funds,
Sure.
but it is an option for other communities who are really struggling, and they are struggling. We know that.
Right.
And so, you know, and they will have to be publicly disclosed that they've accepted and what they've used those funds
Sure.
for. So it's very important. They also can't receive anything from a foreign entity or anything like that. But it's one of those provisions where you kind of got to like the whole thing and
Right.
support it, or tolerate some of
Right.
it and support it. That's how I personally was on that one.
There'll be enough checks and balances
Yes,
there. It
yeah.
remains to be seen. In a couple minutes we have left, I want to talk a little bit about your poll workers. Did you see some new faces, or did you have some older faces? I don't mean by age,
Yes.
but folks that had come that decided not to come, and you've got a bit of a training academy to try to recruit more,
Yes, yeah.
more workers. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we do trainings for all municipalities less than 10,000, which is the bulk of our county. And so we train around 500 workers every election season, and we saw a lot of returning faces. We were nervous because we knew after 2020 that people felt a certain way, whether they didn't believe the work they had done or they were scared to continue doing the work that they had been doing. But we saw lots of returning folks, and we did see new faces that asked us those tough questions in the trainings about the Sharpie markers and about every other thing under the sun. And it was good because we were able to educate them and show them that you're just as part of making sure this is a secure process as the clerks in the county and the state as an election worker. And so your job is so important, and understanding the rules and laws that you have to follow is so important. So it really went well. We couldn't have asked for a better group of election workers.
You got a good plan in place, and I didn't mention that, but you came in 2020, right? Kind of
Yes.
like a baptism of fire. So do you ever wonder, what did I get myself into?
You know, and really those trainings helped a lot because it was a little nerve-wracking after 2020 and realizing how people felt about election directors and election officials. And those feelings are still out there. We still get the angry phone calls and the threatening phone calls.
Oh, gosh.
But the election workers who asked the questions about things that they had heard, and then we could educate them, and that knowing that they left and they were going to share that information with others, reminded me why we do this work. We do this work to make sure that everybody knows it's all our jobs to uphold democracy.
All right. Well, take a breath. You got another election coming up pretty soon, I'm sure. So hope you get a little rest. Nice
Thank
job.
you.
Nice to have you join us tonight.
Appreciate it.
And that's our show for tonight. But be sure to join us again next week for the follow-up. Drug overdose is the leading cause of accidental death in the U.S. So we're going to have a little bit on that next week. Our guest here, Vanessa, is going to stick around for the after show. So have a good night.